The biblical holiday Hanukkah is famous for the lighting of the menorah over 8 days. Yeah, we know that, but what most don't realize is that it is an extremely prophetic holiday that someday will greatly impact every single human alive on Earth. But it's not just a nice, fun, secular holiday. It's an amazing prophetic revelation of the end times. The Antichrist, the abomination of desolation, the persecution of God's people, and Jesus' ultimate victory over the forces of darkness. If you want to know what these things will look like in the future, knowing what they looked like in the Hanukkah story is key. But shockingly, it is only mentioned by name in one place in the Bible. Where do you think that is? It's in the New Testament. And the only one we see celebrating it is Jesus. The Hebrew word Hanukkah means dedication. So, in the Gospel of John, when we read at that time, the Feast of Dedication took place at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus was walking in the temple in the porticos of Solomon. It's speaking of Hanukkah. Also notice it says, at that time. At what time? At the time of Jesus' miracle in John 9 and his teaching in John 10. All of these things happened at the time of the Feast of Dedication, or Hanukkah. So John 10 is Jesus' Hanukkah teaching, and that is where we're going to begin. Truly, truly, I say to you, he who does not enter by the door into the fold of the sheep, but climbs up by some other way, he is a thief and a robber. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I came that they may have life and have it abundantly. Jesus contrasts himself with the thief who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. Who is the thief? The ultimate coming thief is the Antichrist, who is coming to steal the sheep. Speaking about the Antichrist at Hanukkah is very appropriate because historically, the greatest foreshadow of the Antichrist, Antiochus IV Epiphanes, is the villain of the historic Hanukkah account. His name, Antiochus, even sounds like Antichrist. That's why Jesus' teaching at this time is about his great end-time enemy, the thief. And if you want to know what the Antichrist is like, where he's from, and what he's going to do, we need to study Hanukkah and Antiochus because historic accounts exactly match what's going to happen in the future according to prophecy. And in this video, we're going to match those prophecies to the Hanukkah account. For instance, let's look at an example in the Daniel prophecy, and then the historical account, and then what Jesus says about this same thing. First, here is Daniel. Forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary fortress, and do away with the regular sacrifice. And they will set up the abomination of desolation. Next, let's look at the historic record. Now on the 15th day of KISLEV, in the 145th year, they erected a desolating sacrifice upon the altar of burnt offering. I am sure those in Israel, in the days of Jesus, thought that this event in Maccabees fulfilled Daniel's prophecy of the abomination of desolation. However, look what Jesus had to say. Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation, which was spoken of through Daniel the prophet, he's referring back to the Daniel 11 verse that we looked at before, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand, then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains. The disciples were probably surprised, maybe even shocked, when they heard Jesus say this. They thought the abomination of desolation was over and done back in the days of Antiochus, but Jesus was telling them there was yet one more fulfillment of this abomination of desolation, a future fulfillment of this prophecy, that the abomination of Antiochus was just a foreshadow. And this type of dual fulfillment continues throughout the entire Hanukkah account. So let's start with this character Antiochus Epiphanes, which means God manifest. Yes, he called himself God. Sounds familiar. Kind of like the Antichrist, doesn't it? His contemporaries, however, called him Antiochus Epimanes, which means Antiochus the madman, because he was a little crazy. Getting back to Antiochus, he was released by the Romans and was living in Greece when the king of Pergamum, yes, where the throne of Satan is, Pergamum from Revelation 2:13, that Pergamum, that king secretly helped him enter the Seleucid Empire, and by means of intrigue, he became king, even killing his young nephew to assume total power. This matches Daniel's prophecy. In his place, a despicable person will arise, on whom the honor of kingship has not been conferred. But he will come in a time of tranquility and seize the kingdom by intrigue. To which you might say, hey, wait a minute, Nelson, that prophecy relates to the Antichrist. And it does. It's a dual fulfillment, just as we have been pointing out, both Antiochus and the Antichrist. And then Josephus tells us Antiochus set up the abomination. And when the king had built an idol altar upon God's altar, he slew swine upon it, and so offered a sacrifice, neither according to the law, nor the Jewish religious worship in that country. As we have seen earlier in this video, this event was known as the abomination of desolation, until the time of Jesus, that is. Now we know an even greater event is coming. And immediately after this, Antiochus began a great persecution of the Jews. The books of the law, which they found, they tore to pieces and burned with fire. Where the book of the covenant was found in the possession of anyone, or if anyone adhered to the law, the decree of the king condemned them to death. They kept using violence against Israel, against those found month after month in the cities. And on the 25th day of the month, they offered sacrifice on the altar, which was the altar of burnt offering. According to the decree, they put to death the women who had their children circumcised, and the families of those circumcising them, and they hung the infants from their mothers' necks. Jesus tells us in Matthew 24:21 that in the same way, after the future abomination of desolation, a great tribulation or persecution of God's people will break out, but this time it will be one that affects the whole world and not just the nation of Israel. This also exactly parallels Jesus' command that in the future, those who refuse the Antichrist are to run to the mountains, Matthew 24:16. The parallels just keep coming, don't they? You can see why Hanukkah and the Hanukkah account is such an excellent source for those wanting to know what the end times will be like. And of course, the menorah brings light to the temple. Hanukkah revolves around the menorah and oil. In the parable of the 10 virgins, oil for their lamps is what determined the difference between the wise virgins and the foolish virgins.